On the program, Zach, Tamara, Becca, everyone asked me to do a video so that we can count it as instruction over the weekend. So we've actually covered quite a bit on the civil rights movement and English. So I wanted to add in a little bit more on one of the civil rights great figures that probably isn't talked about as much as Dr. Martin Luther King. He's still with us. His name is John Lewis. He is a representative at the moment in the House of Representatives. I've got a picture of him pulled up here on my screen. Oh, by the way, happy 4th of July. That's the day I'm shooting it. I've got my USA shirt on, teaching you about John Lewis and one of the great American figures in American history. So, 17 House terms. For those of you who are sketchy on your social studies, the House goes up for election, all of them, all 435 members, every 2 years. He has been elected 17 times in a row and has been there for about 34 years, which is pretty amazing. And I have not looked this up, but I would guess a lot of the time he does not even run opposed, probably. He's considered one of the most respected members of the House. He was born in 1940, February 21st, 1940, in Alabama to his parents were sharecroppers, which means that they basically worked the land in almost a feudal style system, probably very poor. He was about 15 years old, I think, when he heard Martin Luther King Jr. speak on the radio. He was very moved by the Montgomery bus boycotts that we talked about earlier, how, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and then launched a year-long bus boycott. But before that, I was going to talk to you. It always amazes me when people have kids, you don't, maybe they didn't plan it this way, but it must have been scary bringing someone into the world in 1940. Europe is at war. They don't know it yet, but we're only about almost 2 years away. December 7th, 1941 is when America gets into the war. And maybe that whole wave of patriotism has something to do with it. I don't know. But anyway, John Lewis hears Martin Luther King Jr. on the radio speaking about the Montgomery bus boycotts. He ends up going to Fisk University. Fisk is in Tennessee. And Fisk is an HBC, which is what's a historically black college, and he leads the civil rights movement there. He was integral in organizing the black lunch counter sit-ins during the 1960s. Is how he got his start, and the late 1950s. As you know, the Woolworths and other lunch counters were all white, and blacks would come in, ask for service, and when they were refused, they would sit there in protest, making sure that the business did not earn any money that day. And eventually they had to integrate. Same as the Montgomery bus boycott. It was ultimately the power of the dollar that ended it more than anything else. But Fisk also is where a lot of the original freedom riders came from. Now, you know that is the original freedom rides started in D.C., went down through the South with the intent to make it to New Orleans. And of course, you saw the few minutes of the documentary where that did not happen. The first bus was firebombed outside of Birmingham, and the second one, people were attacked in Birmingham. John Lewis himself later was one of the freedom riders. He was beaten by angry mobs. He was arrested by police. And I believe a couple nights ago you watched the Selma movie. And I'm sure the movie did a good job of highlighting him because he was one of the main people in the Selma to Montgomery March, where on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the police basically lined up and said, you will not cross, and were very, very brutal. It was in that protest where John Lewis almost got killed. He was hit by a police baton in the head, and we're lucky he's still with us. But that was some of the violence that you saw in that movie was real. Anyway, let's see, Freedom Rides. And as you know, the Freedom Rides were originally set up by CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. Sorry, I've got my notes here. I wanted to make sure I didn't get anything wrong. Lewis also set up the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's the SNCC. And he was integral in leading that. By 1963, John Lewis is considered one of the big six, the six major figures behind the civil rights movement, and he continues to work for civil rights to this day. Now, something else that I'm sure the movie covered this, but Lewis was one of the integral figures in the Selma March. Martin Luther King Jr. was not there, to my knowledge, at the Selma to Montgomery March. He wanted to be. Basically, the people in the movement said no at this point. It's way too dangerous. He would be a target. He would probably be killed by the police at that march. They were expecting violence. And basically, they forced Martin Luther King Jr. to hold back on that. I know he wanted to be there. He was also one of the keynote speakers in the 1963 in August when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. John Lewis was also there, and he was one of the speakers as well. Now, as we've talked before, but I haven't gone into much detail on it, we'll hit this coming week, our last week. After the Civil Rights Act of 1964, there is a fundamental shift in the movement away from, not away from civil rights, but towards voter registration. Mississippi especially. Mississippi had about 7% of blacks registered to vote. I believe I said 1% earlier in the week. It was 7%, but about 1% voted. That's where I got that number from. And so obviously for anything to change, for blacks to get on juries, to be able to vote for their representatives, like Mr. Lewis, that's got to change for that to happen. So in 1965-64, there's a fundamental shift to registering blacks to vote. It's called the Mississippi Freedom Summer or the Freedom Summer, and some people refer to it as Mississippi Burning. Basically, there is an attempt to register as many blacks to vote as possible. Now, as you know and you've seen, as you can imagine, the violence that's going to come out of this and the hatred from the KKK and the police and the people who want to keep the South segregated is going to be huge. This was also sponsored by CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. It involved locals, mostly black, and about 1,000 out-of-state white volunteers. A lot of them were college students. They got training, signed up, and then came down south to push voter drives. Now, as you can imagine, this did not, unfortunately, go exceptionally well. The KKK, local police, used violence, arson, beatings. It started in June 15th, 1964, and one of the most horrific things of this voter movement is 3 students disappeared. Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney. They were down there in the deep South Mississippi trying to register voters, and all of a sudden these 3 people are gone. It takes 6 weeks. Everybody in the South is like, oh, this is just a ploy. They're just trying to fake this. It took 6 weeks before the bodies were found, badly beaten. I'm not sure if they ever did find the people who did it, but it was just another unfortunate event in civil rights that eventually galvanized more and more and more people together to make sure that people got the vote. Anyway, my 10 minutes is almost up. That went really, really, really fast. Hope you guys enjoyed this and have a great break. And don't tell anyone, but there will be a quiz on this on Monday. So if you watched to the end, good for you. If you didn't, surprise, there's a quiz, but you don't know yet. All right, guys, take care. Have a great break. See you. Bye.